Okay, so now that we have our project here, we have scaffolded out our pins. We want to connect our pins to our users. So if you go to rcacademy/Pinteresting on GitHub, you'll see some of the details of the project. So far we've done phase 1, 2, and 3. Now we're on phase 4. So we have added devise, we have set up all these things. So now we want to enforce certain behaviors. So we don't want people to be able to delete things that aren't theirs, but we also want them to have to be logged in to create something. And if you create a pin, it should be associated with you. If I create a pin, it should be associated with me. And so what we can do, if you go ahead and go into this devise instructions here, I've outlined how this will work. So far we've gone all the way up to generating our views. And so the rest of the instructions are here, but I want to walk through them and explain them. So the first thing we want to do is that we have a pin model and we have a user model. And what we want to do is we're going to add a user ID column to our pin model. This will be where we store which user is which in terms of the owner of the pin. And so what we've got is Rails generate migration, add underscore user underscore ID to pins, and then we're actually defining what user ID is. So user ID is going to be an integer, and we're going to be indexing this. We'll explain indexes in databases a little bit later, but what we've got here is that this is going to create a new column, and it's going to actually set it as an index. So if we do that, we're going to go ahead and run that command. That will create a migration for us. If we go ahead and open Atom, we'll need to, let's see, look at our schema under DB. You'll see that right now we have a pins table and a users table. Right now pins has description, created at, and updated at. But if we run rake db migrate, right, so we have a new migration, we want to run it, we're going to actually modify our table, and you'll see here that we now have a user ID and pins, and we have an index being added to the pins table of user ID. So those are both there. And when we've done that, that is enough to be able to connect these, but we need to be able to define when we create a pin which user is which. So what we're going to do is come up to our models, and we've gone ahead and added validates presence of, but what I want to do is define the relationship that exists between a pin and a user. You can look for these under Rails associations, so ActiveRecord associations, and you can see here in this case we have class customer and class order. If you want to be able to create orders where customers, for a specific customer, you would have to normally define something like this, where we are creating an order, order.create, the date of the order, and then we have to give it a customer ID every single time. Now, if you do this, we would then have to also make sure that if we delete the customer, we would also need to go delete all the orders. But if we use associations, we can actually make these a little bit nicer in terms of we can come down here and say that if a customer is deleted, go ahead and delete all their orders. And in the case of order, that it belongs to a customer. And that will give us a lot of power, because now instead of saying, if we come up here, order.create, having to define the order and having to define the customer ID every time, this is that user ID that we just added to our table. Instead, we can come in and we can have an existing customer, and we can go ahead and do .orders.create and pass in our data. So what's interesting here is that .create will actually create an item using these parameters. You notice that we only have one thing in here, and so in our case we're going to do @user.pins.create with some parameters. But if you want to create just an empty item underneath a customer, you would do @customer.orders.build. And that .build is essentially like calling order.new, which would give us a new order, but it would also be associated with this customer already. And then deleting a customer means that they would delete all of their orders. So if I come down here, we'll see that there's a few different kinds of associations, and you can read about all of them here, but it tells it to go look for something. So in this case, belongs to customer. This means that in our pins table, we now have a user ID that maps to the user's ID. In this case, we have orders with a customer ID and a customer's table with an ID. And so we can use belongs to map one half of the association. So belongs to, and we're going to say user. Now this will look at the user ID of the pin and go find an ID of the user table that matches that. Now on the user side, we want to do an association going the other direction. So we want to take a look at has one and has many. If we do has one, Rails will only allow a user to have one pin, and you'd have to delete the other pin in order to create the other one. So that doesn't sound very right. We want to do has many, and when you use has many, this is going to be plural, so we're going to do has many pins. And if we go ahead and look at the has many relationship down here, you'll see here that this order has customer ID, it corresponds with this ID, but you can have as many of these orders as you need to. So let's go ahead and save that. And what we'll need to do in order to actually make this work is, let's go ahead and pull up our atom here. And inside of our pins controller, when we look at things like this, we need to be able to define a customer and be able to, sorry, not a customer, we're now working with users. So what we're going to end up with is something like @pin equals, and we need some kind of user.pins.build. And this is the equivalent to creating a pin, a brand new pin, but it would also be associated to this user. And right now we don't have @users, so we're in the pins controller. There is no way for us to say, go get our active user from the pins controller directly. We have to use something from devise. And so devise gives us access to current user. And current user we can call from any of our other controllers. If we don't have a current user, then we're not going to be able to move forward. But in this case, we can do this. We can make this a little bit simpler by doing current user.pins.build, and then we'll no longer need this pin.new. The other one that we'll want to do is here is creating a new pin. So we'll want to do the same thing here, current user.pins. And what we want to do here is a build. So we don't want to do .create because .create will actually try to save it to the database. We want to build us a new pin and then save it. This respond to we're going to take a look at a little bit later, but essentially it's saying that if we're viewing this in the website, do this format. If we're viewing this with a .json extension, do this format. So this allows us to do two different things in order to respond a little bit differently and respond different data as well. So just pay attention to this part here. If we save the pin, send them to the pin. If it doesn't happen, we're just going to re-render our new page so that we can show some errors and hopefully give them a chance to fix it. So we have that current user there. If we go ahead and pull up our devise instructions here, we've done both of these, but we also have a few actions that we can define in our pins controller, because right now we have made it so that we can define what pins are associated to what user. If I go into pins and try to destroy something, you'll see that we can still destroy anything we want. And because we're signed out right now, if we try to create a new pin, we're going to get an error. And that's because current user is nil. We don't have a current user. So what we can do here is we can obviously do a check to say if current user, then do this thing. But there's something we can do that will be a little bit easier than that. And we basically want to prevent someone who's not logged in from going to this new pin page. So if we take a look at our instructions here, we can take a look at authenticate user before action. So this before action is going to say before these actions, these methods in this class, in this controller, we want to call this other thing. Authenticate user with an exclamation mark is something that Devise gives us. So it's going to check to see if we have an active user or not. So let's just do that one. Let's keep the correct user by itself for now. And so if we add that to the top of our controller, again, we're going to do this on all of them except index and show. So that means index and show, we don't really need to worry about authenticating. We can see pins, we can list all the pins out. We just can't create, edit, or delete any pins. So if we save that, and we still can see this, right? So this is our index page. If I say new pin, it's going to make me log in, which is exactly what we want. Let's go ahead and I'm going to turn that off for a second here. And we won't be able to create a new pin, so let's go ahead and let's go ahead and turn that back on. So let's go ahead and create a new user. I'm going to say Colin at renocollective.com. And so my password didn't match. Sign up. So let's go ahead and say I am a pin created with account 2. Create the pin. So now we have account 2 pin. Let's go ahead and edit. Let's make another one. So let's do pins. Another account 2 pin. Create the pin. All right, so let me log out and let's go to pins, and we can see here that we have all these options. If I click on destroy and try to do it, it's going to try to make me log in. So I'm not logged in and I can still see these things. So there's a way for you to then wrap these in an if statement to say if current user or is user signed in, just like we did before up here, you can hide these items. But what we want to do now is log in as my first account. So let's do that. And the issue that we have right now, if we go to pins, is that I'm logged in as account 1, and I can edit this account. So I can come in here and say, created with account 2, edited by account 1, and now that worked. That should not be something that we want people to do. So we're going to now look at that next option, which is before action, correct user. So before you edit, before you update, or before you destroy something, we need to make sure that you, whoever you are logged in as, is the person who owns the pin. And we only are going to call this on edit, update, and destroy. And if we try to do this, this is going to fail because this is not something that Devise gives us. This is something that we need to define ourselves. But let's just go ahead and run it and see what happens. So right now, so far so good. If we hit edit, we should get undefined method correct user. That's okay. We expected that. So now let's come down to our private methods here. And we're going to create a new one. So let's go ahead and do def correct user. And what we want to do here, if we pull up our instructions, is that we want to find, so if we come down here, you'll see the changes that we've already made down below in terms of current user.pins.build. But what we want to do is we want to call correct user on edit, update, and destroy. And if you come down here, we can see how that's going to work. So inside of this private method, what we're going to do is we're going to try to grab a pin that is a part of the current user's pins. So this is one way to do this, but current user, again, is us, right? So we're logged in as this person. .pins, current user.pins will be a list of all the pins that this person owns. .findBy is going to filter those pins by an ID, and we're going to use the ID of the pin. So if we were to go to show, that would be this ID. And we can show things fine. We only want to check this if it's on edit or a delete or something like that. So if we go ahead and take that and put it into our controller, what's going to happen here is that we're going to grab this item. And if this pin is not your pin, this @pin is going to be empty. It's going to be nil. And what we're going to then do is say redirect back to the home page with a notice of not authorized to edit this pin if pin.nil ? So this is another way of writing something like this, but for simplicity's sake, let's write it all as one line. Redirect to pins path, notice And the nice thing about this is if this gets called, this will never let you edit, destroy, or update any of the items that you don't belong to. If it's not true, this will get skipped, and it will be as if it's not there. And you will then get passed on to the edit, the update, whatever it was that you tried to do. So let's go ahead and try this now. So this one is owned by account 2. I did edit it, but I should not be able to edit it anymore. So now you can see not authorized to edit this pin. Let's go ahead and create a new pin. This pin is owned by account 1. So now we have that. And you'll see here that we're listing everybody's pins. So this is really important because this view that we have here is our index. It's listing every pin no matter what. It makes a lot of sense for you to eventually create a profile page that would display only your pins or only account 2 pins versus account 1 pins. But you'll see here that we have account 1 pins and account 2 pins. This one was created by me, so I can edit it. And I can also destroy it. But because these pins were created by another account, I am not authorized to edit this pin.